Section 30 of the Life of Samuel Johnson, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Read by Andrew Coleman. The Life of Samuel Johnson, Volume 1, by James Boswell. Section 30. On Tuesday, July 26th, I found Mr. Johnson alone. It was a very wet day, and I again complained of the disagreeable effects of such weather. Johnson: Sir, this is all imagination, which physicians encourage. For man lives in air, as a fish lives in water, so that if the atmosphere press heavy from above, there is an equal resistance from below. To be sure, bad weather is hard upon people who are obliged to be abroad, and men cannot labour so well in the open air in bad weather, as in good. But, Sir, a smith or a tailor, whose work is within doors, will surely do as much in rainy weather as in fair. Some very delicate frames, indeed, may be affected by wet weather, but not common constitutions. We talked of the education of children, and I asked him what he thought was best to teach them first. Johnson: Sir, it is no matter what you teach them first, any more than what leg you shall put into your breeches first. Sir, you may stand disputing which is best to put in first, but in the meantime your breech is bare. Sir, while you are considering which of two things you should teach your child first, another boy has learnt them both. On Thursday, July 28th, we again supped in private at the Turk's Head coffee house. Johnson: Swift has a higher reputation than he deserves. His excellence is strong sense, for his humour, though very well, is not remarkably good. I doubt whether the tale of a tub be his, for he never owned it, and it is much above his usual manner. Thomson, I think, had as much of the poet about him as most writers. Everything appeared to him through the medium of his favourite pursuit. He could not have viewed those two candles burning, but with a poetical eye. Has not a great deal of wit, Sir? Johnson: I do not think so, Sir. He is indeed continually attempting wit, but he fails; and I have no more pleasure in hearing a man attempting wit, and failing, than in seeing a man trying to leap over a ditch, and tumbling into it. He laughed heartily when I mentioned to him a saying of his concerning Mr. Thomas Sheridan, which Foote took a wicked pleasure to circulate. Why, Sir, Sherry is dull, naturally dull, but it must have taken him a great deal of pains to become what we now see him. Such an excess of stupidity, Sir, is not in nature. So, said he, I allowed him all his own merit. He now added: Sheridan cannot bear me. I bring his declamation to a point. I ask him a plain question: what do you mean to teach? Besides, Sir, what influence can Mr. Sheridan have upon the language of this great country by his narrow exertions? Sir, it is burning a farthing candle at Dover to show light at Calais. Talking of a young man who was uneasy from thinking that he was very deficient in learning and knowledge, he said, a man has no reason to complain who holds a middle place, and has many below him, and perhaps he has not 6 of his years above him, perhaps not 1. Though he may not know anything perfectly, the general mass of knowledge that he has acquired is considerable. Time will do for him all that is wanting. The conversation then took a philosophical turn. Johnson: Human experience, which is constantly contradicting theory, is the great test of truth. A system built upon the discoveries of a great many minds is always of more strength than what is produced by the mere workings of any one mind, which of itself can do little. There is not so poor a book in the world that would not be a prodigious effort were it wrought out entirely by a single mind, without the aid of prior investigators. The French writers are superficial, because they are not scholars, and so proceed upon the mere power of their own minds, and we see how very little power they have. As to the Christian religion, sir, besides the strong evidence which we have for it, there is a balance in its favour from the number of great men who have been convinced of its truth, after a serious consideration of the question. Grotius was an acute man, a lawyer, a man accustomed to examine evidence, and he was convinced. Grotius was not a recluse, but a man of the world, who certainly had no bias to the side of religion. Sir Isaac Newton set out an infidel, and came to be a very firm believer. He this evening again recommended to me to perambulate Spain. I said it would amuse him to get a letter from me dated at Salamancha. Johnson. I love the University of Salamancha, for when the Spaniards were in doubt as to the lawfulness of their conquering America, the University of Salamancha gave it as their opinion that it was not lawful. He spoke this with great emotion, and with that generous warmth which dictated the lines in his London against Spanish encroachment. I expressed my opinion of my friend Derrick as but a poor writer. Johnson. To be sure, sir, he is. But you are to consider that his being a literary man has got for him all that he has. It has made him King of Bath. Sir, he has nothing to say for himself but that he is a writer. Had he not been a writer, he must have been sweeping the crossings in the streets, and asking halfpence from everybody that passed. In justice, however, to the memory of Mr. Derrick, who was my first tutor in the ways of London, and showed me the town in all its variety of departments, both literary and sportive, the particulars of which Dr. Johnson advised me to put in writing, it is proper to mention that Johnson, at a subsequent period, said of him both as a writer and an editor, Sir, I have often said, that if Derrick's letters had been written by one of a more established name, they would have been thought very pretty letters. And I sent Derrick to Dryden's relations to gather materials for his life, and I believe he got all that I myself should have got. Poor Derrick! I remember him with kindness. Yet I cannot withhold from my readers a pleasant humorous sally which could not have hurt him had he been alive, and now is perfectly harmless. In his collection of poems, there is one upon entering the harbour of Dublin, his native city, after a long absence. It begins thus: Iblana, much loved city, hail, where first I saw the light of day. And after a solemn reflection on his being numbered with forgotten dead, there is the following stanza: Unless my lines protract my fame, and those who chance to read them cry, I knew him, Derrick was his name, in yonder tomb his ashes lie, which was thus happily parodied by Mr. John Home, to whom we owe the beautiful and pathetic tragedy of Douglas. Unless my deeds protract my fame, and he who passes sadly sings, I knew him, Derrick was his name, on yonder tree his carcass swings. I doubt much whether the amiable and ingenious author of these burlesque lines will recollect them, for they were produced extempore one evening while he and I were walking together in the dining room at Eglintoune Castle in 1760, and I have never mentioned them to him since. Johnson said once to me, Sir, I honour Derrick for his presence of mind. One night when Floyd, another poor author, was wandering about the streets in the night, he found Derrick fast asleep upon a bulk. Upon being suddenly waked, Derrick started up. My dear Floyd, I am sorry to see you in this destitute state. Will you go home with me to my lodgings? I again begged his advice as to my method of study at Utrecht. Come, said he,